Better health is about being free to do what matters most to you, whether that's running your first 10K, dancing at your child's wedding, or just living with more energy. A body spec DEXA scan is the key to understanding your body like never before. For just $39.95, get a comprehensive whole body health snapshot that guides you on your journey to better health. It's time to take control and make lasting change. Start your journey today at bodyspec.com. That's BODYSPEC.com. Are you ready to take control of your health? At 4U Health, we believe wellness and lab testing should be accessible, inclusive, and yes, fun. With our tech-powered at-home lab test, you save time and money while feeling your best. Say goodbye to long waits and office visits. Check your health on your own terms with 4U Health. Visit 4uhealth.com today and free yourself from traditional medicine. That's the number 4uhealth.com.
The Proof podcast is back with a new case and a new season. 23 years ago, 18-year-old Renee Ramos went missing. Her body was later found in an empty Home Depot building on the edge of town.
I don't think that they arrested the right people. It's about time somebody's trying to do something.
She had a black eye about 2 weeks before she was murdered.
They are involved. They definitely had her body and her backpack.
You know people are going to judge you, right?
Of course. They're judging me now. They've been judging me damn near my whole life.
You can listen now to Season 2 of Proof wherever you get your podcasts, and follow along with us as we reinvestigate the murder at the warehouse.
I have to ask, did you kill Renee?
Hey everyone, it's so good to be back on the mic. Since Season 1 wrapped last month, I heard from many of you that you missed final days as part of your Tuesday routine. Let me just say, the feeling is mutual, and I'm so glad to be back in your ears, bringing you the latest on what happened to Dammion Hurd and who, if anyone, is responsible. If you like what you hear, please take a second to write a review on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods and let me know that you're listening. 5-star reviews really are the best way to spread the word about Dammion's case. Speaking of reviews, I wanted to give a shout out to our 400th reviewer. I did a little Twitter promotion where I promised to read the 400th review on the next episode, and I'm a woman of my word, so here goes. Binge-worthy true crime. This is a fascinating case with bizarre details, and Claire has done an amazing job organizing and presenting each piece. You won't be able to just listen to one episode, so block off time to binge them all. I didn't know what I might end up reading because, as we all know, those reviews come in all shapes and sizes. But I really appreciated those kind words from She Will Rock You podcast, which, by the way, is a great listen for all you music fans out there. I especially enjoyed the Amy Winehouse episode myself, if you're looking for a place to dive in. And speaking of other podcasts, if you can't get enough of Final Days on Earth, I've been hopping around to talk about Dammion's case and true crime in general. You can hear me on The Bawcast, True Crime Podcasters Lightning Round Edition, Quite the Interview with Jack Shaw, and Indie Podcaster, which is a really cool new show that highlights independent creators at all stages in their podcast journey. It's hosted by the podcast's father, and it's a great way to find out about a variety of noteworthy shows. I discovered Complicit Podcast, which is another serialized true crime case that I can't stop listening to. And now, let's get back to our show. From Cold Case Productions, this is Final Days on Earth, the life and death of Dammion Hurd. I'm your host, Claire Santamon. This is a bonus end-of-season Q&A episode. As always, thanks for listening. One of my favorite parts of doing this podcast is hearing from listeners all over the world about what they think happened to Dammion Hurd. I've gotten so many good questions and observations that I couldn't even fit them all in during my first Q&A episode. Which brings me to the obligatory spoiler alert. If you just found this podcast and are tuning in for the first time, welcome. But you probably don't want to start here, at the end of the story. There are 12 episodes to catch up on, so you'll want to do that first before continuing to listen. Alright, you've been duly warned, so let's get started. These questions are all coming from the contact form on my website, finaldaysonearth.com. You can also write in with your questions and comments and a review on Apple Podcasts, and I will definitely read it and get back to you in a future episode. Our first question comes from Sam, who wrote into the website to say this. What type of cell phone did Dammion have? Back in 2014, battery life on phones was a lot shorter, and a lot of people carried spare batteries with them. The majority of phones had backs that slid off. It would definitely not require a screwdriver to remove them. So I'm just wondering why you think a tool was used on the phone specifically. If it was an iPhone, that's some pretty advanced skill to remove the battery. It's not an easy thing to do because Apple integrates its parts. If it's a sliding back phone like I imagine, I have to think that you're on the right track with the screwdrivers being there to do something with the license plates. Thank you again for all the hard work you're doing. There are definitely too many things about this case that don't sit right. First, let me just say, Sam, thank you so much for contributing this question. It's actually super interesting to me because I've always had an iPhone that I couldn't open myself. I never thought about the fact that Dammion's phone might not even need specialized tools to be opened up. Considering the role that Dammion's phone played in this case, I was very curious about it, and I ordered the exact model and the year of his phone. After reading this message, I pulled the Samsung Galaxy S2 out of my desk drawer, and I wish you could have seen my face when I flipped it over and saw the sliding back battery compartment. I was able to pop it off in 2 seconds with my fingers. That really makes me think that if this was my phone, I would have figured that out pretty quickly. And like Sam said, I probably would have kept spare batteries. The location of the screwdriver set being so close to the disassembled phone makes me believe that someone other than Dammion purchased those screwdrivers thinking they would need them to open his phone. But once they took a look, they realized it just popped off. Sam, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. You definitely helped me out by sharing your thoughts. Alright, our next question comes from a Gunnison local who wanted to remain anonymous. She said, I find it really interesting that there are questions around many of Dammion's identifiers, his ID card, license plate, and phone. The package of screwdrivers is what I'm wondering about. It's probably a really long shot, but you mentioned that the package was partially wrapped still. Is there a barcode or any way to identify where the set was purchased from? There are only a few stores in Gunnison that would sell a screwdriver set, so it would be fairly easy to talk to the store managers to see if they sold that type of screwdriver set. Then I was wondering, do stores keep logs of inventory or purchases? I know that is going a long way back to 2014, but if they have inventory logs or something in their system to determine when items were bought, you could narrow it down to the few days surrounding his death. It would be nice to know when the set was purchased and where. If they were purchased with a card, that may be helpful information too. This is another great question and line of inquiry. The screwdriver set is definitely something that is piquing my interest more and more. The crime scene photos that I have from the police don't show the barcode, but it is a somewhat distinctive looking package and a 31-piece screwdriver set. I'm going to think about ways to do some digging on where that package could have been purchased. It's super frustrating that none of this was done back in 2014, when it would have been much easier to track down the tool's possible origins. I'm going to add pictures of the tool's packaging to my website so everyone can see what we're working with. I'm especially interested in listeners who live in the Gunnison area and might know where those tools could be purchased locally. Again, that website is finaldaysonearth.com. Our next question comes from Randall in Colorado. He says, Claire, I have enjoyed listening to your podcast and have looked at aerial pictures on Google Earth trying to figure out where exactly Dammion's body was found. I see Cabin Creek about 7 miles east of Gunnison, but I don't see an area that matches the pictures on your website. Do you have a map or other pics? Thanks so much for listening and joining in on the conversation, Randall. The location where Dammion's body was found is at the intersection of Highway 50 and Bureau of Land Management Road 3107. Locals refer to it as Cabin Creek, or the Cabin Creek Turnoff. Something that was interesting to me is I noticed that none of the college students interviewed by police or me ever admitted to knowing about Cabin Creek. They weren't familiar with the name. They didn't show any signs of familiarity with that area. It seemed like they really genuinely didn't know about it. But other people who were native to Gunnison, like Linda Nienhauser or Matt Marvel, they did know about Cabin Creek and immediately recognized it whenever police put out information about Dammion's body being found at the Cabin Creek turnoff. So that made me wonder if maybe it's a place where older local Gunnison residents are familiar with, but students at the college don't have a lot of contact with it. Google Maps doesn't work for this spot, oddly enough. I found this out when I went to Gunnison myself. It's a weird situation, but basically the Cabin Creek turnoff is right by the mile marker for 164 on Highway 50. And there's also a signpost for BLM Road 3107 once you turn off the highway. As I mentioned in episode 12, Gunnison Police called the location BLM Road 3106, even though the signage clearly indicates it's 3107. At any rate, I took a bunch of pictures and several videos when I was there in 2020, and I'll post those to the blog on my website so everyone can take a look. Alright, our next question comes from Lee in Katy, Texas. Lee asks, have you considered that Dammion did kill himself and his car was ransacked later, after his death, but before his body was discovered? That doesn't explain everything for sure, but I wondered if you'd thought about that possibility. Thanks so much for weighing in, Lee. That's an interesting idea. My main thought about it is if someone did ransack Dammion's car after his death, they either got into the car without a sign of forced entry and relocked it afterwards, or they had his keys to do it. His car was found locked and the keys were in Dammion's back pocket. If the door to Dammion's car had been found unlocked, or there was some sign of forced entry, then I would definitely be more intrigued by this idea. Of course, it's possible that Dammion could have left the car unlocked himself, and someone happened upon it, rifled through the items, and then relocked it from the inside. Under those circumstances, I could see it as a crime of opportunity. His car was left out in the open for days, and there were clearly tons of visible items from the windows. The whole situation is bizarre no matter how you look at it, but it does seem to me that the most likely scenario for the car being in disarray is that it happened before Dammion's death, and either he did it himself before committing suicide, or the car being ransacked was part of foul play. Our next question comes from Jeff in Michigan. Hi, I've been listening to the podcast and I just went and listened to all of the available episodes again. I'm very wrapped up with this story. One of the things that keeps sitting weirdly with me is why Dammion's pants were undone when his body was found. Has there been speculation about that? Was there an autoerotic asphyxiation component to the choking game? So Jeff was not the only one to write in with thoughts on this subject. I also heard from Caleb in Philadelphia, who did his own research on autoerotic asphyxiation and wondered if I had considered this in my theories of Dammion's case. I did in fact consider this idea, especially in the early days of my research, and a couple of things dissuaded me from taking it too seriously as a real possibility. The weather that night, to me, is a big point against this theory. It was near freezing, with sleet reported in the early morning hours. Not exactly comfortable conditions for an outdoor erotic experience. And then there's the fact that Dammion had multiple girls wanting to hang out with him that night. If he was feeling like companionship, he had options that seemed more appealing than a frozen cliffside. Finally, there was nothing in Dammion's digital history or dating life that indicated he had a proclivity for autoerotic asphyxiation or the more mild version of the accidental death theory, the choking game, which we talked about in episode 4. But it's not just Dammion's pants that are unzipped. His shoes are also untied. I feel like a more reasonable explanation for that is getting dressed in a hurry, or possibly going to the bathroom outdoors after arriving at Cabin Creek. Several listeners have pointed out the possibility that someone else could have dressed Dammion after he was unconscious, and they didn't think to zip his pants or tie his shoes. That being said, if anyone has more information about the autoerotic asphyxiation theory and Dammion's possible connection to it, I'm all ears. Our next question comes from a listener in Fort Worth. You keep saying no footprints were found and Dammion's shoes were clean. Was his footprint even at the scene? This is a great question. There were a couple of visible footprints in the scene photos around Dammion's car, and specifically one near the trunk. But as far as I know, no one forensically matched those footprints to Dammion's shoes. I'm going to put the picture of the footprint near Dammion's car and the photos taken of Dammion's shoes on my website for comparison. It would be so helpful to be able to identify the print in the dirt and either tie it to Dammion's shoes or rule them out as the one who made it. Our next contributor is Laurel Hostler from DC. She asked, "Are there consistent patterns to murders that are staged suicides? What things on that checklist apply here?" Laurel went the extra mile and did her own research, and she actually found an academic study on staged homicides from 2015. It's a fascinating read with tons of useful information and parallels. I'm going to go more in depth with its contents in my next episode, but I wanted to give everyone information to look up the study now so you can read it in full before my episode comes out. I reached out to the author, Dr. Claire Ferguson, in Queensland, Australia, and we're making arrangements to speak. In the meantime, I'll post a link to her study on the blog on my website, finaldaysonearth.com. The title is Staged Homicides.
McDonald's presents Burger Reviews by Hamburglar. Today's review, the hotter, juicier classic burgers. Mr. Hamburglar. Robble, robble. He said, "Of all the McDonald's burgers I've ever hamburgled, these are the hottest, juiciest, and tastiest." Robble.
Hamburglary is on the rise. Get caught with a medium double cheeseburger meal for $6. Price and participation may vary. Promotion pricing may be lower than meal price. Comparison to prior classic burgers.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
An examination of common features of faked burglaries, suicides, accidents, and car accidents. And it was published in 2015 in the Journal of Police and Criminal Psychology. The study examined 115 staged homicides in the U.S. to determine common elements. According to Ferguson's research, features of staged suicides included weapon arrangement and simulating self-injury to the victim, rearranging the body, and removing valuables. This is the first peer-reviewed, published study to examine the specific features of these scenes, and it is the largest sample studied to date. Once again, a very special thanks to Laura Hostler for pointing out this study. You definitely have not heard the last about it.
Taste the Mediterranean through March 19th at Whole Foods Market. Save on animal welfare certified bone-in beef short ribs, sustainable wild-caught sockeye salmon, and more. Find sales on Parmigiano Reggiano, charcuterie and ground lamb. Grab an olive boule bread from the bakery. Plus, wines from the Mediterranean start at just $8.99. Taste the Mediterranean now at Whole Foods Market. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly.
Hey, it's Claire Sanema, host of Final Days on Earth. Have you ever signed up for something and then totally forgotten about it? I just learned that 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused each month. Thanks to Rocket Money, I can see all my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones I'm not using anymore. And now, I'm saving money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/finaldays today. That's rocketmoney.com/finaldays. rocketmoney.com/finaldays.
At Angel Bliss, we believe every parent's journey is a beautiful adventure. Our mission is to make it joyful and stress-free with thoughtful, safe, and innovative products. Born from a love for family, we promise peace of mind for parents and comfort for babies. From playtime to bedtime, every Angel Bliss product is designed with care, reliability, and a style to nurture the special bond between parent and child. Angel Bliss, creating happy memories, one baby at a time. Visit us at angelbliss.us. Angel Bliss.
In our first Q&A episode, we had a special guest, former homicide detective Zach Johnson. He was such a big hit, we decided to bring him back again. Zach is not affiliated with this case. He is a special consulting detective for us, who is a former homicide detective from Lubbock, Texas. So Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, I am so curious to hear what questions you came up with. I know that you've been listening to the latest episodes, and we've been chatting a little bit back and forth, but I haven't heard these questions, so I'm excited to hear what you have in store.
Well, my first question is concerning the individual Noah. I was very curious to see if he had ever been fully identified, and if he had been, if there was any follow-up done with him to try to figure out where he was getting his information.
Yeah, that's a great question, Zach. I was also very curious about Noah. I asked Detective Chris Danos about that back in 2015, and his response to me was that he was never able to identify who Noah was, and that he didn't get any further in his exploration of that rumor, or of Noah being the source of the rumor, or identifying him. Whenever I did some poking around, I found a Noah that was on the football team at Western, and I thought that possibly was interesting because Kyle Pyatt had said that he'd gone to a football party, and so I didn't know if maybe a Noah from the football team, could be someone that could have been a possible source, but as far as I know, that was never checked out. There were no Noahs that were interviewed and included in the police report that Gunnison Police put out. So I agree with you that seems like an unresolved issue.
There were several other people that had the information, correct, about the scene of not the scene of the crime per se, but where he was found.
Right. So, there were two people. As I remember, it was Andrew Morris who first said that they heard that he got beat up and hung from jumper cables, and then it was Kyle Pyatt who also said that he heard that some kids beat him up and dumped his body. And then I believe Zach Schenk also said that he heard a version of that as one of the possible theories, but he mentioned quite a few different things. But I do believe that the idea that he could have been beaten up was one of the theories mentioned by Zach Schenk as well.
Right. Okay. And I'm assuming that at the time that they provided the information to the detectives in their interviews, was there any information out there to suggest what actually had occurred? Or were they just saying, well, I heard da-da-da-da-da, and it was before any of the details had been released?
Yes, that's a key point. So the details had not been released by law enforcement or in any official way to the media, in any known public way, how Dammion was found, that he had been found hanging, that jumper cables were used. Those were all pieces of information that were held back. And so the idea that it started to come to the police's attention through witnesses in the case that he had been hung from jumper cables, that he was found, in this remote area, that raised some alarm bells for police. How did they know that jumper cables were used? That was something that they were initially trying to track down. Shortly after that, they did put out releases that said that he had been found away from his car, that he had been found in an area off of campus that was remote, and so part of that started to come out. But the really key elements that were never publicly disclosed until many months later were the jumper cables, that element of it. And so that was something that whenever I talked to Detective Danos back in 2015 for CBS News, he was still trying to authenticate where that had come from. He was trying to understand if there had been any leak, to the media or to anyone else that these witnesses could have been feeding off of to know that information. As I understand it, he was never able to find, a source where they could have
could have known that from. I know he asked me personally, as a member of the media, if I had heard any information about the condition of Dammion's body or how he had been found before April 9th. And, I told him I had not, and I wasn't aware of anything. I think he thought potentially I could have been a source of that information, but I did not know that, so I had no way of knowing that. I had no knowledge of that at that time. So it was a big surprise to me whenever I put together the timeline that some of the wrestlers knew or had heard that he had been hung from jumper cables, and I wondered how they could have known that.
Yeah, that's a huge question. How the heck do they know that? That's like the elephant in the room. I can imagine it being very, very frustrating not to be able to authenticate that, and especially if the quote Noah guy is the source of that information, not being able to track him down or not being able to authenticate him has got to be exceptionally just frustrating and just irritating.
Yes, and the wrestlers, in a way put it on the track team, that we heard that the track kids beat him up and hung him from jumper cables. And so the track kids said, we don't know anything about that. We weren't, involved in anything after, the fight with Dammion. That was the only split second, that we had any interaction. And then as I've been speaking to more members of the track team, and one in particular, Sam Vandeveld, the team captain, who the police didn't speak with and who broke up the fight between Dammion and Anthony, he reached out to me since the podcast has been out. Yeah, I was so grateful for that. And he said, I heard you're trying to find me. I heard you want to talk to me. Here I am. And so we had a very interesting conversation, and he remembered, separating Anthony from Dammion, and, his recollection of that fight was very consistent with what other witnesses had said, had happened, and how it occurred, and how he was the one that pulled Anthony off of him, and separated them, and then got Anthony out of that situation. And so I was curious what he remembered about the rest of the weekend. And he had a pretty clear memory of that Sunday morning was their long distance running day for cross country. And so they got up and they had a run about 9 o'clock, and it would have been about a 15-mile run. And that was their practice schedule. And so I thought that was interesting because Sunday, as you know, is one of the key days in the timeline because Dammion's body is seen at Cabin Creek sometime between 10 a.m., when he's first, Linda first arrives and sees his car there, and then around 1 p.m. when she believes that she sees his body on the ridge along with another figure crouching with binoculars. And so the idea of identifying those other people and who they were, the idea that they potentially could have been on the track team or related to Dammion's fight with the track team, finding out that the cross-country runners, which Anthony Rios was a cross-country runner, Sam Vandeveld was a cross-country runner, that they had practice at that time, to me that was very interesting. And I had heard that from Tyler Gates, who was a cross-country runner that the Gunnison police spoke with, but it was really nice to hear Sam Vandeveld bring that up as well, because I thought, that puts those two pieces together, and we've got some corroboration of that, because I tried to find like a practice schedule or anything, but they weren't online that I could find. So that sort of gives them an alibi for that time period, if you want to call it that, and I thought that was interesting, that just naturally came up as part of the conversation.
Going back to our witness out there, did she have any explanation as to why, or did she have any belief as to why she'd been taken out there so many times, and then why she, I don't want to say finally recanted, but why she changed her witness, statement from the first time that she'd been out there to the last time she'd been out there? Was she able to clear any of that up for you or describe it with any more detail as to why she had changed her story like that?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting just the number of times that they talked to Linda, because they only talked to, the only other witness that they talked to multiple times really was Kyle Pyatt. Pretty much everyone else they just talked to one time. They talked to Kyle Pyatt twice. I believe they talked to Tori Boyle twice, but only one interview was recorded. And then with Linda, I believe it was 4 times that I saw that she were noted in the police report that she was interviewed by different people, some law enforcement and some, including the coroner, the medical examiner. So that was interesting. Her understanding of that was they were just really trying to figure out who the person in the white truck was. And that was what she felt like was the piece of information that they really honed in on.
Was she ever able to articulate why she had changed her statement to, well, I saw this, and then as we go along through the different interviews, well, that's not actually what I saw. I was confused. It was shadows. Those types of things. Was she ever able to articulate that?
Yes.
For anybody?
Yeah, what she said to me, because I was curious about that as well, and whenever I met with her in the summer of 2020, and I was going through all the different statements she'd made with her and asking her about them and the chronology of it, the way she phrased it to me was that, the police told me that they didn't see any footprints out there, so I couldn't have seen what I thought I saw because there weren't any footprints.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that to me seemed like a kind of a stretch to take an eyewitness statement and then after the fact say, well, we couldn't find footprints 4 days later whenever we arrived, so you must not have seen this. That was her recollection of it. That's how she felt like she came to that conclusion. But, even as I spoke to her, she really never changed her story in that her initial impression and what she saw has stayed remarkably consistent. She said that her belief is that she saw a body on a ridge. She saw another figure crouched down beside that, near that, and she even drew a picture of where she, the two figures in relation to each other, and that she believed that there were multiple people out there watching her as she was hiking with her dog. And that was a really, strong feeling that she had and she continued to have. But, her explanation to me was, I guess I couldn't have seen what I thought I saw because there were no footprints, and because when we went back and looked at the scene, and again, all the snow had melted by this point, it's completely different. At this point, it's a week later, that she goes back with police, and they tell her, well, maybe you were looking at these rocks, and you see how there's some different dark marking on the rock. Could that have been what you saw instead of this person? And, she said it could be. It's possible. I can't be sure. And so their concluding analysis of her is that she couldn't be sure and she didn't know what she saw. And so, but that really wasn't what I took her initial statement to be, and the heart and meat, of her intention in coming forward. So it was very interesting to see how that got, down the line and how it how it was, I don't know if you want to say manipulated, but how it changed and how it was dealt with and eventually metamorphized, into this other statement.
Yeah, because, when you start stacking things on your, for lack of a better term, on your scales to try to figure out, is this foul play? Is this suspicious death? Is this straight up suicide? And you start stacking things on either of those sides, it's really difficult to err off of suspicious death because we've got so many things here with, these kids just dropping jumper cables in interviews, that information has not been set out yet. And I would imagine if the press had that information and they leaked and it got leaked to them, it would have been all over TV before the interview, so the police would have known that it was out there, because that's pretty big information. And if media's going to take and run with something, that's a hell of a story to run with, because they're really thirsty for details about information such as that, So you've got that, and then you've got it coming from this ambiguous subject, Noah, who no one's ever been able to find or authenticate. And then we have our key witness that says, yes, this is what I saw. This is the vehicle. This is what it looks like. Down to the license plate frame, and then we interview her 4 times. And it goes from, I saw people to, well, there were shadows on rocks. It was just very interesting to me because it's really, you really can't plant your flag on something quite yet because there's just too many unanswered questions.
I totally agree.
I can imagine that that's very frustrating. But yeah, there's just so many unanswered questions. I was curious, and you may have addressed this before, and I missed it, so forgive me. I was curious to see if after all of the things were done with law enforcement and Mr. Hurd had gone up to Colorado to retrieve Dammion's belongings, if anything at all of his that was noted to be missing, like from the car, the LeBron James t-shirt, that type of thing, if any of that stuff was just discovered when he was getting Dammion's belongings from his room, when he was moving all that stuff back to Texas. Do you know if any of that stuff had ever been accounted for, like way late in the investigation or anything of that nature?
So as far as I know, the LeBron James t-shirt has never been accounted for and was not at Dammion's dorm room. The items that were officially collected by police as evidence in the case, which would be everything in the car, the cell phone, all of Dammion's belongings that were at the scene, those were all boxed up and put in an evidence box that Gary Hurd has not opened to this day.
Right, yes.
Yes, so we don't know what all might possibly be in there. In the police log of evidence, which, I would hope is accurate, it's not listed. LeBron James t-shirt is not listed. It's the packaging is there, but not the actual t-shirt. And then as far as what was found at his dorm, I know the dad cleaned out his dorm room. It wasn't considered evidence, and he got like his iPad and other things like that. But as far as I know, the LeBron James t-shirt, we've never been able to account for it.
Right. And my understanding is still that the interior of the car appeared to have been gone through. It did not appear to be orderly.
That is definitely accurate.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And so just the first thing that popped into my head was, if I've made this decision to go out there by myself and to do this thing, it's not something that I'm just going to go out there and then all of a sudden decide to do. I'm not going to be frantic about it. So there isn't any reason for me to go through and really tear through my car to find jumper cables, to find other items that I'm going to use. It's my car. I know where these things are at, and so that was just really peculiar to me, that the inside of this car appears to have been gone through, boxes ripped open, kind of like in a frantic manner that you would assume. I know that the biggest hurdle is, one, he's police chief now. When he did his independent reports, I have to go by what the crime scene says, what the pictures say. And, there wasn't any evidence of any other people by footprints and so on and so forth. And I know that at the crime scene, we've been able to shore up some of the things. We've been able to explain away some of the things that we saw, the jumper cables. Well, of course, we know why they're there. Okay, well, why is the sleeping bag there? And you brought up a couple of scenarios as to why that sleeping bag was there. Why is the car gone through? Is it because he was searching for something? Okay, if it was, what's he searching for so frantically? Why is the box ripped open? Why are these items not found? A statement was brought up, well, when people are getting ready to end their life, they give away certain things. Well, okay, that's all well and good, but wouldn't people have come forward and said, well, for some reason he gave me this LeBron James t-shirt, or for some reason he gave me these earrings, or some reason he gave me this piece of property. I had no idea why he did it. He just did it, because that's what you commonly see in those types of investigations. People come forward and they say, they gave me this, and so on and so forth. So I was just very curious as to how the evidence at the scene, save the lack of footprints, could be explained, or if it was ever explained, because, you've got to account for every last detail. We can't just pick and choose what fits. We have to account for everything at the crime scene. I was just really curious as to how many, if every single thing at that crime scene had been explained to where they felt comfortable with it. I'm assuming that they did, because the case is closed out.
Right, they felt comfortable with it. Gunnison Police felt comfortable with it. Lieutenant Matthew Murray felt comfortable with it. But like you, I still have questions about it. And I think your description of it being a frantic scene is spot on. And it does look frantic. And I agree with you that if you've made a decision to commit suicide, the idea that you would go out there without something in which to commit suicide with, to know that you didn't have the proper tools, you wouldn't head out there until you had what you needed.
Right.
But the idea that in the official police scenario, understanding of the evidence, it is that he got out there, contemplated that he wanted to end his life, and then began going through his car to find something to accomplish that task. And, it does seem like there's some logic missing there for it being your own car, knowing where the items are in your car. So it was interesting to me to try to make that fit. To me, it just really doesn't fit very well.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad somebody's on that page as well.
Yes, definitely.
I didn't want to be the lone survivor on that.
No way. No, I'm with you.
Taste the Mediterranean through March 19th at Whole Foods Market. Save on animal welfare certified bone and beef short ribs, sustainable wild-caught sockeye salmon, and more. Find sales on Parmigiano Reggiano, charcuterie and ground lamb. Grab an olive boule bread from the bakery. Plus, wines from the Mediterranean start at just $8.99. Taste the Mediterranean now at Whole Foods Market. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly.
The next topic that Detective Johnson wanted to talk about was my interview with Zach Sorensen.
Please remind me, Sorensen, how is this individual involved? I had a note to ask about Sorensen and if the police department had ever followed up with him.
So Zach Sorensen is an interesting guy. He was one of the last people that Dammion texted on the night of that party. And he texted him simply the address of the wrestler's party. And there was no response that I could see from Zach in Dammion's phone, and, that was the end of that. But whenever I was going through Dammion's phone records and trying to figure out, how to create this timeline again of Dammion's night and of his final days on Earth, I noticed that there was this text to a Zach that I'd never heard of before. And in the phone, he was listed as WSCU Zach. And I saw that the number was different than Zach Shank, who was also a Western, student. And so I thought I would just call it and see who it was and see if he would talk to me.
As you know from episode 12, Zach was more than happy to talk and share his opinions on the case.
What's blowing my mind is how the police are literally buying and reading all the evidence and not getting any idea of foul play.
And so he was someone that had become friends with Dammion since coming to college, and the police did not ever talk to him. So he, as far as I know, he's not in the police report, and he said the police never came knocking at my door. I thought they might come, want to talk to me because I knew Dammion, and he remembered as he said it, that he had seen him that day, even though they didn't go to the party together, or he didn't attend that party. But he had seen him earlier that day, and he felt like he was one of Dammion's friends at that time, and he thought, maybe the police are going to call me about this, but they never did, and no one ever called him until I did. And so that's when he shared, his beliefs about what had happened to his friend, and, the stories and rumors that he had heard around campus and that continue to this day.
Everyone in that town, every student knew that Dammion got killed at that party by some wrestlers, and they fucking made it look like he committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Like, everyone fucking knew about it. Like, I don't know if I'm the first one to tell you this, but, like, everyone knows that that dude was murdered, and that the whole city threw it under the rug and made it seem like it was a suicide. Didn't want the school or wrestling team to look bad, and, like, it was a complete shit show cover-up.
And it's his belief that Dammion was the victim of foul play and that there's been a cover-up. And he articulated that very plainly. Yes. I was surprised, he kind of caught me off guard. I said, you're the first person that's really laid it out there, because everyone else has been very guarded in what they've said, and you just put it all out there. And he was like, well, it's been 6 years at this point, by the time I talked to him, and he's like, and if someone's, not going to say it, I'll be the first one to say it out loud, to the media. But this is what we think happened to our friend.
And he said that they actually did a poll in the media there, did they not? And asking the people that lived there in Gunnison, hey, what do you think? Do you think that this is a homicide, or do you think that this is a suicide? And they had a lot more people in the affirmative for homicide. Is that correct?
That is correct. So I was able to find a survey that the Gunnison Country Times had done, which is a local newspaper in Gunnison that covers the university pretty heavily, as well as other issues. And they do a weekly poll in their paper about some local issue. And so after Dammion's case had been closed, the way they phrased it is, do you believe the police were justified in closing the death investigation into student-athlete Dammion Hurd? Yes or no? And an overwhelming majority, I believe it was something 85%, close to 90%, said they did not believe that the police were justified and it should not have been closed. Other two students, Curtis Markham and Zach Sorensen, referenced another poll that had been done on campus that I was never able to find. I don't know if that was through the campus newspaper or where that might have been, and maybe it was the Gunnison Country Times poll, and their memory of it, is just a little bit different than what it was in print. But they both referenced a poll of the students that said, do you think he was murdered? And that a huge majority, again, close to 90%, said yes. So there's at least one poll, if not two, that shows broad community, local belief that there's more than meets the eye to Dammion's case, and that the case closed suicide ruling, did not answer all of their questions.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's so many things here at play that still are wild cards. I feel that there are still questions that need to be answered that are unsettling. There's just certain things that don't make sense.
Yes, obviously I agree with that. I'm curious, from your perspective as an investigator, as a law enforcement professional, what do you think, if anything, could be done at this stage with Dammion's case, or should be done?
Well, what you need to do is you need to have somebody there at PD reopen it, right? Of course, it'd have to be reopened by PD for further investigation. And then and that's going to be a tall order, but after they do that, then I would start trying to fill these holes and ask these questions that are the really hard ones, that are going to be the most challenging, such as, we need to get this kid identified that had this information that gave to these wrestlers about jumper cables, because we sure as hell didn't do that. So we need to get that out there. We need to figure out who that person is, track them down, interview them, and find out, hey, how do you know this? So we can get that ghost exorcised. We can get that demon out of here. So let's get that done.
Detective Johnson is referring to the rumor first mentioned by wrestler Andrew Morris about Dammion being beaten up and hung from jumper cables. The fact that jumper cables had been used in Dammion's death was key information that had been held back from the public at the time that Andrew divulged it to police. Andrew said he heard that information from his brother, Justin Morris, who lived in Pueblo, Colorado. When Detective Chris Stanos talked to Justin, he told him the source of the rumor was a kid named Noah, but that person has never been identified. In addition to finally determining the source of the jumper cable information, Detective Johnson said his next point of inquiry would be about hiker Linda Nienhauser.
I would be exceptionally interested to see if Linda would still be down with doing a cognitive interview, and if she would be, having that done and seeing what information we can get from that.
I have to tell you something about Linda, because I had that same thought, and I wanted to follow up with her right before the podcast was released. I had her cell phone number, and I went to call her, and the number, it didn't work. And so then I looked her up, and she actually died in February 2020.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, of cancer. And I was devastated. Yeah, I was really devastated for her. Primarily just, I had no idea that she was sick or, anything. It was so sad. And then, of course, the information that's lost forever with her.
Right.
I'm grateful that she gave so many interviews, and that, she's on the record multiple times, and including the interview that she did with me, which, as far as I know, would be her final statements on it.
Yes.
And then finding out that she had passed away, suddenly and somewhat unexpectedly, that was really heartbreaking.
Yeah, man, that is so tragic, because she had such a tragic story.
Yes.
It was, and to end just like that, man, that is tragic. That's very sad.
Yeah, I was really devastated when I found that out. I couldn't believe it. I just kind of stared at the obituary on my screen and just on the floor, and man,
Detective Johnson said he's run into a similar issue before in his own cases, where a key witness died before being able to testify.
We tried to figure out a way to get around that, and the only thing that we could do was track down the police officers that took the statements from the witnesses, and then bring them in and have them do a sworn affidavit to say that, yes, we did this on this day, this is what happened, here are the original statements, da-da-da-da-da. And that was going to be the best that we could do on that. Except for her witness statements, I think the most important thing would be to track down this Noah kid, find out exactly what he knew, how he knew it, when he knew it, and then see where that takes us from there. It's going to be a tall order. You can't really do any type of search warrants or anything like that, because it's just too damn long ago.
Yeah.
You've pretty much interviewed everybody and their mother on your podcast.
Yeah.
And so, you got a whole bunch of stuff there, a whole bunch of really, really good information. And I was very impressed to see how thorough the investigation was. I mean, you went and you put out all the fires. You even went and covered TBI and CTE and all those types of things, even, down to the different chemical grades of LSD. What's the percentage of this causing death? What's the percentage of this to induce suicidal ideation? So on and so forth. And so you've got all of the outside stuff covered, and you got those fires put out. I think the only other thing that you could do is you could take Linda's statements and you could start tracking down that information, specifically the truck.
Detective Johnson is referring to the white truck with the extended cab and camper shell that Linda Nienhauser saw at Cabin Creek on Sunday, March 30th, 2014. The vehicle and its owners have never been identified.
Yeah.
And not being able to present this stuff into court, you could use that as leverage. And what I mean by that is you go back, you get the information on the pickup truck from what you know, and then instead of looking up license plates, you go through the people that knew him, right? And you start trying to figure out if at that time, in the circle of friends that he had, who drove a vehicle that was like this one. And when you can track that down and you can find it, then you start bringing those people in, and then you start saying, hey, you know, on this certain day at this certain time, we know that, you know, there was a vehicle that matches your vehicle description that you drove at that time, and it's up there where he is. How do you explain that? And see where that takes you.
Right, and of course, my mind immediately goes to wrestling captain Kyle Pyatt, who was driving a white truck with an extended cab that was registered to his parents at that time. So that's certainly an interesting follow-up interview that was never done.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, Claire, that's not going to be that tall of an order.
I agree with Detective Johnson that for a police officer, getting these witnesses to talk wouldn't be that difficult. A journalist like me, however, lacks the power of the badge. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, Kyle Pyatt has declined repeated offers to be interviewed for this podcast.
You get a hold of him and just say, hey man, you know, we're looking into this thing again. There's just a whole bunch of questions that are unanswered, and I just need to know, because I'm trying to cross my T's and dot my I's. What type of vehicle were you driving at the time that this occurred? But that would be something that I would heavily consider doing.
And really and truly, you know, there could be multiple people who were driving a white truck with an extended cab at that time, because it's a popular, common vehicle. So we know for sure, we really do know that Kyle was driving that vehicle, but what we don't know is if anyone else was.
That's exactly right.
And none of them have been interviewed about their vehicles.
Right.
And,
Right, and so that's got to be, because here we go again. Here we go again back to, what does the death scene tell us? What evidence is there? Well, even though that this witness statement, it's not occurring at the time that police discover the scene, the witness statement still includes details of the scene where his body was there. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Right.
She got there before the police did. She saw it in a more pristine manner than they did.
Before it was disturbed. And so you don't have the luxury to say, okay, I believe that you saw this person and I believe that you saw that person. I know that you did, but these other things, they weren't seen, right? You don't have that luxury. She says that this was the scene before the police even got there. This is what I saw. Then we have to investigate that. If we cannot confirm any of that, then okay, fine. That's all well and good. We did our due diligence. We can't confirm that stuff, and we go on about our life. But until we cannot confirm anything, until we either confirm or deny it, we've got to investigate it, and we've got to be able to stand up and say, yes, I followed that lead and it ran me right into a wall. Or I followed that lead and it took me here and then it took me here. You know, so, but I believe that yes, you can always do something in a case like that where there's questions, but the tallest order is going to be reopening that bad boy.
Right.
It's going to have to be reopened, and the other thing that's going to have to be done is the medical examiner is going to have to rule it other than suicide, unknown cause, suspicious death, because if you can reopen it all day long, but you can't get past that suicide ruling by the medical examiner.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, you may have some ground to stand on if you can go to the medical examiner's office and say, look, this is what we've uncovered so far. We reopened the case. We've been doing some more investigation. This is what we have found. We believe that there could be some suspicious circumstances after we've looked at it again. Would you consider amending your ruling? And here's the investigation. Could that happen? I don't know. I'm not in Colorado. But that would be something that you sure could try. Cold cases are exceptionally solvable. You just have to be able to look at it and get a little bit creative and think outside the box on it. It's definitely worth another look for sure. But you got to get over that hurdle of reopening that case.
I agree. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that the medical examiner said, if any additional information comes to light, like I would, consider it and, reconsider this ruling. It just always felt like there were unresolved issues that were pretty key, like when did this young man die? So it's always been an outlier to me, just in all the cases that I've looked at and worked on and studied and reported on. It just seems like it has way more unanswered questions than the typical quote-unquote closed case.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely agree.
Thanks again to Detective Johnson for joining us on another Q&A. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But I do have another episode up my sleeve for next week. Here's a sneak peek. On a special bonus episode of Final Days on Earth, the life and death of Dammion Hurd. Multiple people have come forward and contacted me after hearing the podcast. People involved in the case, like Dammion's mom, Jamie Hurd.
I mean, he talked to his dad more than he did me, but we talked every Saturday. That was our thing. So he can talk to his little brother. Even on the 29th, he told me he was going to that party.
Former cross-country runner Sam Vandeveld, who broke up the fight between Dammion and Anthony Rios.
And so he was just really upset, like crying and having a hard time.
And someone else who came forward, who I'd never heard of before.
Name's Joe Montiano. I was Dammion's RA his freshman year. But that Thursday was the last time I saw him. We actually ate lunch. I just asked him what his plans were, and he told me that he was probably just going to do the usual, like maybe go for a hike because the weather was supposed to be nice that weekend.
Plus, we'll take a look at the fascinating work of Dr. Claire Ferguson, who has been researching detection avoidance behaviors by murderers and crime scene staging for the last 15 years. Don't miss it. Final Days on Earth is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Cold Case Productions in partnership with Podcast One and Live by Live. Each episode is written, reported, and produced by me, Claire Sandomal. Original theme music composed and performed by Riley Simmons. Songs licensed from PremiumBeat.com are Bending Truth and A Thin Line. Editorial consultant is Lucy Scott of LucyMedia.com. Additional production help from Amber Robinson, Janice Sue, and Elise Weber. Executive producers are Sharon Richards and me, Claire Sandomal. Special thanks to Zach Johnson from the Lubbock Police Department and everyone who has submitted questions and comments about Dammion's case. I really appreciate it.